Greetings and a very warm welcome indeed on behalf of the All Faiths Network, and a particular hello and greetings to our illustrious speakers who've agreed to enter the fray and address some of the issues and topics that are exercising us in promoting this meeting. Religious extremism is in many senses a toxicity which is as dangerous to faith itself as it is to society and increasingly to the equilibrium of the world that we share. The notion that one can appease and can see extremism as part of a never-ending continuum of thought is as dangerous as it is defeatist. The fundaments of the faith that we all hold dear, no matter our denominations, our religions, rest on the Old Testament truism of loving one's neighbour as oneself. They rest on a sense of good neighbourliness, even as they rest on a sense of a society that is coherent, that is accepting and tolerant, and is as cohesive as our ideals allow it to be. The notion of partisan religion, the notice of supremacy, the notion of hate is poison to all that we hold dear, and it increasingly poisons the atmosphere of the world in which we operate. This meeting is not party political. It's not denominational. It transcends all of that. For these issues are the big picture. They are also in the smallest, minutest picture of our faith lives, and they ought to be, these issues, exercising us as we think forward for our world, our country, and our democracy. So without flying a flag, or without criticizing specifically this politician or that view, we raise a voice today to be heard from a faith perspective, and to be heard as a plea towards moderation and toleration, towards what I would call moderate multiculturalism, which is the multiculturalism of everyone able to be himself or herself, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their roots, authentic, but at the same time assimilated to the whole, homogenized in the most positive sense, and working as a big society, shoulder to shoulder. You haven't come here to hear me, so without further ado, and notwithstanding that I shall be popping up and in very military fashion, holding the ring, keeping everyone to time, and refereeing the proceedings going forward. But I've said my piece, and I hand over with some delight to Martin Waitman, the director of the All Faiths Network.
Thank you very much. I simply wanted to say a few words to you about the All Faiths Network. The All Faiths Network is a relatively new interfaith body. We, although I think all of us involved have had quite some experience in the interfaith field for many years. We got together because we felt we wanted to shine some light in areas where light needed to be shone in the interfaith field, and we hope to add to what is already going on in a constructive and creative way. You can always go to our website or contact us for more information, but at this point, that is all I wanted to say to you. I hope you're going to enjoy. I think we've got a wonderful panel here, and it is for them to speak rather than I. So thank you very much.
Friends, you'll all have a program, and we begin at this point a discussion between Dr. Damien Thompson and Sheikh Dr. Mohammed Al-Husseini. Sheikh Professor Mohammed Al-Sharqawi is on his way, so I do apologize for him. He may be joining us hopefully toward the end of this session, but I hand over now to our speakers.
I think you'll kick off. Okay, right. Hello, I'm Damien Thompson. I'm the editorial director of the Catholic Herald, and I'm the publisher of for Spectator's Health, Money and Life magazines. I also studied the sociology of religion academically, and I wish somebody had warned me that my supervisor would be sitting in the front row. Certainly the most brilliant woman I know, but also my toughest critic, Professor Eileen Barker. So that makes me nervous. And the other thing that makes me nervous is I thought I would be here to throw a spanner in the works at some stage, but since I'm the first speaker, I'm going to start by throwing a spanner in the works by saying that with all due respect, Rabbi, I don't really buy your concept of faith. We were asked to read a document prepared by the Church of England, and I assume that many of you have read it, and well, Bishop James knows very well that the relations between me and the Church of England hierarchy have never been friendly. So I will begin by saying that I didn't think the document got us anywhere. I didn't think it was of any particular use at all, because it seemed to be searching for this mythical third way between the free market and the benevolent state, which everybody's been looking for so long, back to Catholic social teaching and Blair's Third Way and communitarianism and Cameron's Big Society, and there have been so many attempts to bridge this gulf or fuse these, if you like, the statist and the entrepreneurial instincts. And actually what's happened in practice is that there has been a convergence of thinking between the parties. Certainly, I would say until, I'm not sure about Ed Miliband, but certainly, if you looked at Tony Blair and David Cameron, I don't see an enormous ideological difference there. I heard a very fine speech by Michael Gove the other evening, which was an attempt, I think, to bridge a gap, and which contained many statements that would have actually seemed very startling coming from a conservative. I didn't see in the document anything that pointed a way forward beyond exhortations to the common good, and specifically I didn't see it address the really acute and desperately worrying problems that overshadow any encounter between the faiths. And one of those problems is that we're living in a time which the Bishop's document hinted at but didn't spell out properly. We're living in a time of unprecedented demographic and technological cultural change, and these things cannot really be separated from each other. In the past, religious minorities developed, if you like, sort of discourse with the state, which kept everybody reasonably happy for years. It was the years of from the 1970s to the 1990s or whatever. It was the years in which they talked the language of the the public sector, they talked in the platitudes and courtesies and etiquette of we respect you, tolerance, multi-faith, etc., wonderful diversity, richness, which is a word I noticed. I wondered how long it would be in the Bishop's document before I came across the dreaded word richness, but there it was. Drilling down was there as well, plus lots of talking around things. Nobody ever says talking about things anymore. But the enormous wave of immigration, unprecedented in our history, that we've seen over the last 20 years, has caused an enormous amount of demographic and cultural disruption in this country, and it's caused a tremendous amount of tension between, I say faiths, but actually it's very, very difficult to separate people of a particular faith if the faith is culturally distant from that of Anglo-Saxon society, and the obvious example is Islam. It's very difficult to separate faith and culture, and I think attempts to do so can lead us down the wrong route. It's also dangerous, I think, to try and isolate faith as something that groups necessarily share in common, because that raises the question, what do you mean by faith? Now, it's very difficult to define that. It's even more difficult to define what you mean by religion. Books have been written not just about defining religion, but about the near impossibility of arriving at a single description of what religion actually is. But we find ourselves in a situation in which sudden immigration, globalization, the internet, ill-judged wars and interventions by the West, a perfect storm, to forgive the cliche, has shaken things up to the point where we're suddenly confronting the problem of religious extremism in Britain, which is overwhelmingly a problem of Islamic extremism. I'm just not going to pretend that it isn't. I know that there are extremists in all religious groups, but that's overwhelmingly, practically, the problem that we face. And this is where this multi-faith dialogue let us down, because there wasn't very much systematic thinking about how Islam operates internationally, and about how people's sense of their own religious affiliation is twisted and turned and changed by culture shock, by the sudden access to vast amounts of information, ideas, passions, opportunities to express yourselves provided in the digital age, and overwhelmingly an acceleration of change. So the result is that we find ourselves confronting the problem of Muslim radicalism, and we tie ourselves in knots trying to separate Muslim radicalism from Muslim extremism, from orthodox, conservative Muslims, from whatever, and we discover that it's not just a spectrum, it's a whole group of different spectrums, and that the dichotomy between the extremists on the one hand and the true believers who like all faiths, want neighbourliness and tolerance. They do not, by the way, and I think that's a misrepresentation of faith in itself. These platitudes no longer serve us. We just have to confront the very, very difficult situation in which we're in. Globalization means that interfaith relations are now under tremendous strain, and the polite fictions of 10 or 20 years ago are being exposed for what they were, which is fictions, or shall we say, a particular elite group within a religious community representing themselves on behalf. There's a particular problem in Islam where you don't have a priesthood. So in a globalized world, people belonging to different faiths find their passions reignited and differences accentuated or rediscovered, shall we say, the differences that exist in the scriptures, those scriptures which, and this is true of, I think, most faiths, often emphasize the wickedness of the other, to use a sociological cliche, the importance of fighting people who are different from yourselves, the importance of observing rules which are repugnant to people from other religions, and I'm not talking about any one religion in particular, it's if you look very closely at the scriptures, there's so much there that is unacceptable to people who don't, who are not members of the religion based on those scriptures. And if people are truly observant and faithful to the word of scripture, you'll pretty soon find that tolerance is a relatively low priority. It's not a huge theme, certainly not tolerance as we understand it in the 21st century or the 21st century in any of the scriptures, though you can certainly interpret their benevolent statements as tolerance if you want to. So it leaves us in a mess, but it leaves us in a world in which young Muslims are learning about Islamophobia or rediscovering Islamic identity. They're constantly being told, no, it's not the real thing, but nobody can define what the real thing is, because Islam, more than most religions, is rather amorphous and difficult to map. Meanwhile, Jews are discovering first of all, I think there's been a rediscovery of Jewish identity through the internet, just as there has been a rediscovery of Muslim identity through the internet. Some people say there's been a hardening of attitudes, but others would point out that Jews are discovering the extent of anti-Semitic attacks through the internet. Probably if we left it up to the BBC to discover the extent of attacks on Jews throughout Europe and the Middle East, then we wouldn't have a clue as to the extent of the problem. But the internet tells us, not always accurately, but a picture is emerging which is making people very, very anxious. So to wind this up, I'm not offering any answers, I'm just saying, for goodness sake, can we please recognise the very difficult situation in which we find ourselves. My only suggestion is based on what I learnt from Professor Barker, who will have disagreed with an awful lot of what I've just said, but which is that religion is back. I read a piece in The Spectator saying religion is the new politics, which is clear, but what I mean is that our failure to understand religion, the Foreign Office failure to understand religion, has led to disaster in the Middle East. But also, governments have been taken in by multi-faith niceties and platitudes and have not really made any systematic study of the religions, and therefore they're taken by surprise by all these shocking tensions and events and the babble of voices claiming to represent tolerance, faith, the real Islam, the real Christianity, real Judaism, whatever. The accurate study of religion, the accurate methodologically agnostic study of religion is a starting point, I think. I didn't even know, I should have, but I didn't even know that there were people called Yazidis until they started starving on mountaintops. I think that perhaps before we start congratulating ourselves on the richness of our faith traditions, we should actually start digging deeper, cliche of the decade, but anyway, we should start digging deeper into the beliefs that people hold, how they hold them, which is often an easier question to answer than why they hold them. A whole load of pseudo-psychological nonsense is talked about the why people are radicalized. It's not that simple, but how they hold these beliefs, what the processes are. So my call, I think, my suggestion is that the accurate study of religion should precede the exchange of platitudes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, peace be with you all, and on this very important day, La'ila Podrick Shonadiv, happy St. Patrick's Day. I thank you very much for the honour of contributing and sharing with you, and I'll offer a few remarks instead of my Sheikh Mohammed Shaqawi, who I hope will be in attendance in due course to perhaps contribute to the discussion. Religious people are often accused of being rather too navel-gazing, so I think it's a wonderful thing that we're here, sort of navel-gazing about the minutiae of their own internal disagreements and institutional quarrels. So I believe it's a really heartening thing that we're here in Church House, the Secretariat of the Church of England, on a Christian Saints' Day to discuss matters of wider public interest that are not just intra-religious. And in this context, I'm actually sort of rather fondly called to recollect a time I was invited as a Muslim speaker to what was essentially an internal Anglican discussion about the whole debate, the whole sort of ruptures around gender and sexuality, at which one of these senior clergy colleagues said from the podium that the way to tell the difference between the various Christian denominations for a non-Muslim like me was to look at the picture on the wall in the vestry. Because in a Catholic vestry or sacristy, there's an icon of Jesus of the Sacred Heart. In a Methodist vestry, there's a picture of Jesus the Good Shepherd. And in an Anglican vestry, there's a full-length mirror. And consequently, with all due respect,
I use that one.
Lord Bishop. And so I think it's rather appropriate that we're engaging in a very honest, and I really respect Damien for his contribution, a really honest and frank discourse around these sensitive issues in the spirit, in the heritage of this country, which is the heritage of free speech, as expounded in the People's House just across the way. Rather appropriate to this interfaith gathering, the Irish also have another saying, Isar Sco Achela Awir in the Dina. It is in the shelter, literally the shadow of one another, that people live. And that notion, the shadow, the Sco, has kind of that ambivalence, which I think Damien rather poignantly expressed in regard to what multiculturalism or the impact of immigration has meant to this country, and it behoves us to speak truthfully into both the bright sides of that pluralism, that richness, and also the darker sides. And I hope we're able to address both sides today. With frankness, I'd say that the juxtaposition of this place, the secretariat of the church by law established with the structures of power, is no accident. And I think the pastoral letter, I would disagree with Damien. I think the pastoral letter has many things that I found profoundly moving, actually. It speaks from a Christian place about care for the vulnerable, care for those who are economically challenged, the benefit claimants. It speaks for the asylum seekers. It speaks for all those that Jesus would take in. But it also calls, importantly, for the principle of subsidiarity, which is a Catholic social teaching that was expanded by Pope Pius XI in Quadragesima Anno, the papal encyclical. And according to the implicit message of this pastoral letter, as we've discussed, under Labour, according to the argument of this letter, power has become too concentrated in the hands of the state. Under the Tories, too focused around the market, and so a third way is being sought, which supports kind of localism, subsidiarity, in grounding power into local structures, and particularly what have come to be known as faith community leaders or faith community key players, and principally these non-elected faith leaders who are to receive the privileges of this devolution are the personages of the church, the established church, and also the faith leaders of other faith communities. And this is, in fact, represents an approach, a rapprochement between church and state, between the religious domain and the domain of political power, democracy, that is obtained over the period of the Blair administration and continues in the form of the big society. So that pastoral letter explicitly mentions the big society, or what Labour would also market as kind of blue Labour or one nation Labour. And it's something that's been funded at great expense by the Department for Communities and Local Government and the Home Office in the course of seeking to assuage some of the problems of Islamist extremism. And I'm extremely grateful to you for addressing that very, very important and direct question. At a time of downward pressure on our public services, on healthcare provision and so on, there's kind of a codependent relationship that's developed between government that wants to do public services on the cheap and faith communities that are seeking ever more recognition. And I see within my own tradition a number of agendas. From an Anglican side, I've got close relationships with a number of Anglican churches. have plenty of Anglican friends and colleagues. I do sense that there's a sense in which there's a crisis of relevance that's facing an established church where congregational attendance is in such decline, aside from the enormous growth of free churches, Pentecostal churches and the evangelical churches. There's a crisis of relevance that affects clergymen with their beautiful, well-endowed, empty churches, which they express through participation in good works. The church by law established, Muhammad, you're my parishioner, that kind of thing. Through sitting on committees for local government and also national government, and thereby exercising a certain amount of backroom political influence. Now, this might work well enough within the church by law established, which has the history and the heritage of this country. But when you have within it a Muslim dimension where there are clear Islamist agendas, non-violent Islamist agendas, and I'm really honoured to see my friend John Ware at the back of the room, who's very proudly and very bravely addressed this issue of non-violent Islamism in this country. Those who have a non-violent but nonetheless supersessionist and supremacist agenda to advance political Islam in this country, this can be extremely problematic, because you see, for all the goodwill that's expressed in that letter, as a Muslim of all people, I know what happens. I know what happens when religion gets political and gets too mixed up with power. When the reverential deference to religious clergy by government, we somehow exempted from the cross-examination that other sectors of our life are subject to, come into play with agendas of power and money. I was in Church House. I've been in Church House quite a few times in recent months as part of a commitment to ministering clergy sexual abuse survivors and other survivor organisations that are contributing to this public inquiry into systematic abuse across different institutions. And I know that the Church of England and Justin and the Church of England, as well as the other faith communities, will be first in the firing line. And we had a meeting with one of Justin's deputies, Archbishop Justin's deputies, and one of my colleagues said it will be a tsunami. It will be a tsunami that will open the wounds of many, and there will be a flood of people coming forward that will challenge everything about religion in this country, from the notorious Anglican Diocese of Chichester with its appalling record of sexual abuse, to the horrendous and yet unaddressed questions around Muslim grooming gangs in Rotherham and Rochdale, and they're not just culturally Pakistani grooming gangs. They are grooming gangs that use Islamic language in the way they talk about kafira, as unbeliever, bonded women with a theological mandate. In the context of Interfaith, I've devoted some years of my life to interfaith work, and I'm honoured to have alongside me dear friends, Jewish friends, my Rav, Rabbi Reuben Livingston, and other friends in the room whom I work with, and I'm proud to work with across different faiths in a shared vision, Satish, in a shared vision to challenge extremism and promote human rights over and against sort of religious privilege. But alongside that shared commitment to doing justice in interreligious harmony, we are called not to allow interreligious dialogue to become a smokescreen, a kind of benign PR smokescreen for those who ultimately, one way or the other, and it's not just Muslim extremists, they have their agenda as well, but others who seek personal advancement and power, and indeed large amounts of public money through the agenda of interreligious dialogue. We had the scandal of the great British interfaith leader Chowdhury Muinuddin, who a few months ago was convicted of participation in an appalling genocide during the 1971 Bangladesh War of Liberation, and yet he was fated in this country. This war criminal who'd come alongside other Jamaat-e-Islami activists after that war to set up organisations like the Islamic Foundation, Jamaat-e-Islami organisations, and influence the Muslim Council of Britain, take over the East London Mosque, these people have been fated as the leaders, and somehow they speak for me. Muslims are put into a box as a result of this kind of localism and this kind of third way that's being supported through some of the sentiments expressed in that letter. I've been told to behave myself today by friends, so I shan't go around naming names or pointing fingers. And my time is up. So I will simply draw to your attention that there are a couple of really important reports, some of which you've been emailed round to you. The report by the Gatestone Institute by our dear friend Sam Westrop on the interfaith industry, which can very clearly elaborates the collusion between organisations, taxpayer-funded organisations like the Interfaith Network for the United Kingdom, our national umbrella body, and likewise a joint statement by our dear and very brave friends Satish Sharma and Danny Diskin from the Interfaith Alliance, a joint statement speaking the mind of many Interfaith Network member bodies about the extent to which those who've spoken up, those who've whistleblown, very much echoing the experience of those who've whistleblown about other forms of abuse within religious communities, experience considerable bullying, threatening and silencing of dissent. When I tried to raise questions about interfaith collusion with Jamaat-e-Islami extremist organisations at the AGMs of the Interfaith Network, I subsequently was shouted down, and I've had people like the Christian Muslim Forum director complaining and wanting those minutes redacted, my voice censored. And so even Muslims aren't allowed to speak out about Islamic extremism. Where have we come to in this country? I close and thank you very much for your time, and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Damien and Mohammed, for being quite so honest and open and forthright. I suspect there will be some questions. We're going to have a problem with time. I've made an executive decision to move everything 5 minutes on because we started a few minutes late. But I'm going to have to limit the questions. If don't all put your hands up at once, please. Yes.
First, I'd like to put the question to Dr. Thompson. Thank you for defining various
Put the question and stand up, please.
abbreviations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Defining the meaning of faith, etc. But one thing I think I disagree with you when you mentioned that Foreign Office does not understand the division within Islam and so on. I think they do. They have had 100 years of learning to do. They've been very prevalent in Indian subcontinent and in the Middle East. They know very well. Unfortunately, the situation in the Middle East is making of America. We are following American military intervention like a poodle, and that has been said so, and that's a net result of that. It's not that Foreign Office does not understand, they do understand, but unfortunately every time we get dragged into all these military interventions with America. And my second question is for Mohammed, thank you for raising that very important issue about is Muslim not being able to speak on this Muslim extremism that is going on. And in fact, I think we are, unless it's tackled, I think we're going to we are storing a lot of trouble for ourselves in the future on the streets of Great Britain, because all these Jamaat-e-Islami, the one Mohammed mentioned, and there are so many other groups which are not being tackled. And there I think the government, all the agencies, security agencies, I think they don't have the remit to be coming down heavy on these people. They are just poisoning the minds of everybody, Muslims and other people. And I think they need to be tackled, and I hope this will be taken forward, these issues will be raised as a result of this forum here. Thank you.
Damien?
Just very briefly, my remarks about the Foreign Office are based on conversation with people in the Foreign Office, particularly one, I'm not going to name him, but somebody who was working for the Foreign Office in the Middle East, and at one stage was an administrator of a region there. He said he was staggered by the ignorance of Islam by his colleagues in the Foreign Office. Their ignorance of the different strains of Islam, the fact that they had no understanding of the theological underpinning that divides Sunni and Shiite, to say nothing of Alawites and Ismailis, and so he actually made an interesting comment. He said, you're much better off going to MI5, because he said they deal with real people who've been in really tricky situations, and they tend to have a rather sharper understanding of what's going on. I'm disinclined to blame America for everything. It's very easy to do that. While I can clearly see that you have a point, but I'm very disinclined to this. But it's very easy to slip into blaming America for everything. But what I wanted to add is I was delighted to hear what Mohammed just said. I'm going to have to retract some of my rude remarks about interfaith dialogue. If during an interfaith dialogue, which this is, somebody can be as frank and as fascinating as that, then I can really see value in this.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you. Quick comment. I don't think we're going to go much beyond that question unless there's a very quick one to follow. You had your hand first, sir. You'd like to stand up?
I'm sure the Foreign Office does have a very good understanding about Islam, because A, the Bosnian Muslims were looked after by the British Armed Forces and the American Armed Forces during the conflict. And also when Kuwait was invaded by Saddam, the joint forces defended Kuwait. And also the Muslims did have the luxury to have their own country when Lord Mountbatten managed to divide India. So there you are. So I don't think Muslims could make any complaints. I'm sure that Foreign Office does and did have a very good understanding about different faith, that's including Islam and Hinduism and Christianity.
You mentioned the Bosnian Muslims, and that's, I've been out to Bosnia and I've met Muslim leaders there, and a Bosnian Muslim and a Pakistani Muslim don't necessarily have that much in common, I have to say. I remember having I was with I think the Mufti of a particular town in Bosnia, and he was the one drinking beer, and I was the one not, because I've given up the source, but he was a fantastic guy. The Bosnian Muslim community there was so very, very different from the sort of Salafist tradition, but not necessarily any longer. It's being radicalized. We use this word radicalized in ways that are extremely alarming. It will be very, very, very different to the situation when I visited in 2001. So things change very, very fast. So it's a challenge for not just the Foreign Office, but intelligence services around the world, of every country. And I think we also have to recognize that Russia is doing everything in its power to exploit religious tensions, for example, tensions between Orthodox and Catholics, which so often overlooked. To me, it's the most, in some ways, it's the most poisonous religious division in the world today. People don't talk about it that much, but Putin is playing that, playing that as relentlessly and cynically as you might expect. Which is why, just go back to my earlier point, that's another area. Do the Foreign Office really understand the difference between the Christianity of Constantinople and the Christianity of Rome and the Christianity of Canterbury? No, I'm not sure that they do, and they don't understand that the East-West division is absolutely crucial.
It's very unfortunate.
Friends, if I could cut across.
It's not helping the Pakistan and the Indian division, the Kashmir. And so
I don't mean to be draconian, but we've got to move on. We're 10 minutes late now, and there we go. We've had an excellent first session, I think you'll agree, and that has started us off very much on the right, or perhaps the left foot. And I'm now going to open the second session and welcome Bishop Graham James and Miss Judy Kaner to address us.